today we're going to be going over the Zai distinct signal of unflappability. I am a Naiji and I have, go get this way. I'm a Naiji and I have Zai as my offside power. Jonathan?
And I'm a Zai, so I have Zai as my source power. So I give off the distinct signal of unflappability.
Big man of campus
You
with
feel
Zai.
You feel the unflappability?
Excellent. So we're going to do what we do with the other distinct signals, and that's go over the power flows again, and also the counterbalances, and give some flesh to it to understand why a person who's reading, for example, a Zai would get that distinct signal of unflappability. Do you want to start us off?
Yeah. Okay, so we begin with the concept of perfection.
Well, the thing to note on this is that there's a 49-51 quality to what perfection is. It moves like Zai's harmony. Oh, behind the camera, who do we have?
Zai Christina and Nijai Christina.
Excellent. So like Zai, Zai will try to keep that equilibrium, but it's done in a very logical way. So it has like a 49-51, like, is it there, is it not there? And so there's like a phrase that comes to that of just so. And Zai and Zai both have a just so quality, because if you don't do it right, then the sacred resources of Zai, or in this case the vital resources of Zai, will not be released. But because of the values-based nature of Zai, that just so quality has a just so. You know, it has a poignancy. So even though it has a just so attitude, it comes off as poignant. But with Zai, it's different. It's more of just so, as if you were walking with a bowl of water and you're trying not to spill it. So you have to walk just so. Does that make sense? So it's also just so because of that, it is the opposite. It's extremely unemotional. Because if you allowed yourself to become flappable, it would shake the water, it would spill. And so Zai does not want to spill or to come off that equilibrium state. That will be revisited in all the power flows as we go, but it begins there. Do you want to?
Yeah, the concept of 49-51 and the just so quality of Zai, it's like Thomas said, it's in itself uninvested from the situation. For example, the dinosaurs went extinct because they just weren't strong enough to survive. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
I may not like it, but too bad.
Yeah, very, very true. So it has a very kind of natural law quality to it. Can we keep going then?
All right, that brings us to clarity.
Okay, so for clarity, going along with the flappability, you could almost see flappability as static or distortion that comes in, or bad weather, things that are going to make the lens unclear. So regardless of what perception you're using, and even what discernment other than Zai you're using, they will put distortions, vibrations that come from other agendas other than what you are directly looking at. So whatever Zai is attached to, it will use this clarity on it. But the other powers will try to bring in their concepts, the things that are on their mind, their agendas. They're trying to push for that. But that quite often is really just some mess that's on the view screen. I mean, even though it may be valuable in other times for the psyche, at this particular moment when Zai is working on, it's actually just stuff that's going to make it hard to see. So there's an unflappability about that in two ways. One, the fact that you just wiped it off the screen and it ain't nothing but a thing. Some people find that unflappable, that you can just do that. But if you're doing a certain task and that other kind of activity from one of the pod powers or some other activity in the environment is going to be something that's going to is going to obscure the screen, then the first priority is, well, that's going to mess up everything, so you can't be here. So you just get wiped off of that stimulus or whatever was impinging. It just gets wiped off. It does not make it into the tower because the tower's on a job. That's important. It's on a job, and so it can't be having its lens, its scope, the various thing it's working on be getting cloudy, or it can't do its work. So there's unflappable of it just does that, and it's not a problem for it. Other powers may find that odd because they can't do that as easily. There's also an unflappable element in that you could think of it as like the windshield wipers of the psyche. Similar to them in the car, all psyches have that windshield wiper that does that. But imagine having a greater or lesser powerful windshield wiper. If you're in bad weather, the ship that has the best and most constant windshield wiper would probably seem like the most unflappable of the ships. Does that make sense? So in that case with the clarity, because it wipes it off without even thinking about that, it feels very strongly that it has the right to do that. So it does not go, should I? Right there, that's flapping. If something gets on your eyes, what do? Just wipe it off. Right? You don't overthink that. You don't get overly emotional about it because it just needs to be done. And if a person wipes something out of their eye or off their screen and it keeps coming on and they get annoyed at having to wipe it again, they're starting to flap. They're flapping on us, okay? If you're in a bad weather or something, you need to see the screen, right? It doesn't matter if extra bad weather is coming on your wind. What are you gonna do, argue with Mother Nature? That's just stupid. There's no point to it, so all you do is you just keep wiping it. You just keep wipe. So you do it easily, and you'll keep doing it over and over again, because if you're working on a problem and like sand is dumping on it, what do? You just to pick your map up, shake the sand out, and keep looking at it. If sand gets on it again, what do? Do it again, because you can't see the map without it, so there is no choice. And so Zai is very comfortable with that. It's very comfortable with that, when you get something on, you wipe it off, it's in your way. And if it keeps getting there, obviously we'll get into later on how you try to move to where you're not being gunked up. But if you are still getting gunk on there, you just keep wiping it off, and because you have to do that. You want to take something on that?
No, that was perfect. So we're just gonna move right along.
Cool.
Precision is next.
Okay, precision we have here. Oh yes, the
Suspension
this is the suspension system. This is getting into similar with the wiping away, but now it's getting more intense. You're getting more where you're physically getting vibrated. And this gets into that vibrations, the impacts that Zai and Zai handle. In this case, you're starting to do something. It's the beginning of doing a thing. It can be, in my case, I have Zai with V, and he has Zai with Ni, so they're compounded with a different objective perception. But still, in the end of the day, you're going to try to stay on a track. The correct one, the perfect one. So you have a perfect track and you're keeping your window clear so you can stay on it. Well, what if it gets windy, so to speak, when you're doing it? So not only are you getting stuff on the window, you have to keep it clear, the car is actually being moved in some way. This could be a metaphor or physically. What Zai is going to do is it's going to attempt to find the route that you are trying to stay on despite being thrown. It's going to keep trying to find that path that you were intending to do, so you are precise. So you can almost think of it like you hear like auto distortion removal software where they can listen to songs or conversations and remove static that's irrelevant. That's what Zai can do, and therefore it makes the conversation that you hear afterwards more precise. You can hear it much more clearly because you're able to like get rid of the stuff and stay on it. You can kind of track the form that you're trying to make perfect. Once you've established that there is a dynamic or a perception that you want to make perfect, you can just stay on it because you're clear of vision, and also because it's a kind of touch. It can be a physical touch or a mental touch. But I think a really good analogy of this is, are you familiar with like the fighter planes?
Yeah.
The only time, like from the World War I and then moved on to World War II. In World War I, they were still propeller planes. Okay, and there's a technology that was developed that radically changed that way of fighting, and it's very much a Zai metaphor. It was something they did with the engine, and the way they did it is they got to where the engine could become aware. Extreme precision here. When you see what it does, imagine the precision you have to have. The bullets used to shoot out to the side, but it made it hard to target. So they moved the guns in front, but then it became an issue because the propeller is there. So software was developed, or a technology was developed, so that the blades would be in a rhythm, a precise rhythm with the gun. And when you fire the gun, it literally fires through the spinning blades, and they know when the bullet's coming, and the blades are never there where the bullets go through. This radically changed the fighting because of the power that precision gives is those kind of things, because you're like, is that even possible? If you're precise enough. If you can shoot bullets through spinning blades, it is, but you gotta be pretty freaking precise. But you see what it does. That's an incredible amount of, you would say, distortion. Spinning blades that actually make a plane fly, and you're going to shoot a Gatling gun through it. So, but if you actually see the openings, then it really is, this gets into it, just openings. Now, it does make your testicles come up in your stomach a bit, but in the end, it's mathematical. it works. It shoots through. And over time, you forget. This is a good way of looking at how Zai works in people. Some people, when they realize their gun is shooting through the spinning blades, different pilots, that takes a little longer to get over for some people. The fact that what they're doing is so close to going radically bad. But Zai's cool with that. If you were precisely on the good path, it doesn't matter how close danger is, it's not on you. And so Zai is quicker to say, oh, the bullets shoot through the blades. It's fine. And so because it's comfortable with actually a thin slice, if it's on the 51 or 49 or something, then you've got it. That's key. If you're precise enough, you've got it, and therefore the dangers on the non-precise sides will not matter to you. So although some people would see that and get flapped, if you were the Zai engineer who did it, you're like, no. At the rate the blades are going, actually the speed is well within the time, like the mechanism that's here is easily precise enough to handle that operation. So that's rather unflappable about shooting bullets through blades.
Yeah.
Does it make sense? But you're like, yeah, but it's totally precise. It's not going to hit. It's not going to be. This is an ongoing theme. It's not going to be a problem. Zai is very good at shrugging off things that are like, but you have 49.51. That's like a 52. But it's very close to 49.51. And we'll get later on to like the calibration.
No, is it?
Yeah, exactly. We start getting like the calibration and so forth. Really, to a person who has Zai high in their hierarchy, or someone who just has developed it well, you get more and more comfortable with going closer on those 49, 51 calls, and you still are like, yes, I'm still on this side. Like to someone who has strong Zai, 51.5, that might as well be an ocean. If it's about how I'm going to win a move, if it's can someone knock me over, like arm wrestling? No, they can't beat me. They can get close, but my Zai will actually know, no, they'll get that close and they won't make it, which means I win. Which means I'll bet money. That's the key. That's how confident it is. That's why you're unflappable. It's like, you bet $1,000 on a 10% advantage. It's a 10% advantage. With 10%, I'm going to win. Now, a lot of people, they would flap on that, but Zai won't. Not if it's done the calculations correctly. I've done the calculations, and it's a small margin, but it's a margin, and I'm going to get it. I can guarantee a win with that. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of unflappable. You've seen a lot with grappling and different things, because you're like, yeah, I'm shaving it, but I'm going to get that shaving.
Yeah.
Do you have any of that with, say, composing, where you're calling it close, where it could go one way or the other? Some people get freaked out when you radically start moving things if it gets close to like a sensitive spot. But sometimes the best stuff is there. Mm-hmm. In like the real, I think that one like in the edges, the best stuff's really close to the edges. So if you don't get really close to it, you can't get the best stuff.
Yeah. A lot of music I compose, I process in such a way so it ends up being really loud. But I do it with the other channels that are also really loud in a way that fits together perfectly, so it never never distorts.
Never distorts. Yeah. That is awesome. Yeah. So it's a comfortability with extremes. Mm-hmm. That's a good way to really bring in there. Zai's very comfortable with extremes, and it actually likes going, ooh, this extreme actually goes right next to this extreme, and they do or don't go over, and that's actually very fascinating. And if it doesn't go over, it's kind of fun for Zai to stand near an edge because I'm not over the edge.
Yeah.
Now that people are like, you're so close to the edge, but I'm not over it. I'm not over the edge, so I'm fine. So unflappable. You move on?
Yeah.
Nice.
Dispassion.
Okay.
The anti-flap.
Yes. Flap can be thought of as yanking on you, like, what about this? When what about this has something to do other than perfection of what you're doing, other than clarity on keeping your vision on perfection, other than the precision of moving in such a way that continues the perfection. So anything other than that is, to Zai's point of view, and I've agreed, is flap. It's not relevant to what you're doing. And all of the powers flap in some way. Obviously, as the objective discerners, they're flapping about the dynamics. They're like, the dynamics are happening! Well, if that's relevant to Zai, it might move, and that's where the dialogue with Z comes in. That's inspirational. Mm-hmm. But if it's not relevant, then it's not moving.
Yeah.
So it has to be relevant, it has to be pertinent, or why are we even talking? What else were we going with that? Dispassion. Right. So those are very obvious. Actually, also rather obvious are the objective perceptions. The objective perceptions are coming in from the environment. Mm-hmm. You'll very much see this when Zai V is doing something physical, or when Zai Ni is doing something more abstract. They're trying to follow something, and other forces of their own psyche or the environment are trying to say, what about this?
Right.
I'm in the middle of the maneuver. There's a perfect trajectory when you're on any maneuver, physical or mental, and when you're on it, if you're yanking on me, that's like yanking on a driver when they're in a race. And Zai is really good at ignoring that. It just ignore it because that's just gonna make me crash. I'll pay attention to that when I'm not on that perfection spirit form. But as long as I'm on that, to step away, to go to it would distort the perfection I'm working on. I won't do that now Zai is on the case. So these obviously, then you're going to have, obviously, Zai does flap because of poignancy. You can see poignancy as a way of like, and so that's going to take off of, it's a different just so. It's a just so of, inner values being impinged on. But that would actually throw the just so of holding the water bowl so it doesn't spill. You don't want to have an intake of air, even though that would be correct for a Zai response. In certain things, you're supposed to do that. But with Zai, you're supposed to not take sharp intakes of air. You're supposed to not flinch. Not flinching is very important. And then finally over here is Vi. Vi is history, and sometimes history or memories is irrelevant, is going to throw off the perfection, is going to throw off the precision and clarity. So again, that's just flap. That's just flap from the past. Now one that may throw some people is Nai, because Nai seems like it would be flapping since it's detaching, but it is. Zai, as a discernment, is working on a thing. And it's a thing, a perfection is achieved, and then a clarity of how to continue and a precision of how to continue, it goes from there, and a dispassion of not being interrupted from that. Nai is a complete interruption, and that's why it is flapping. It basically says, hey, we need to take a time out and totally detach and go in the ocean here for a while. Well, if Zai was working on something, then that's actually a lot of flapping. That's actually saying, wait a minute, I'm working on a case right now. You don't break a case until it is solved. So that's why all the powers, all the 7 powers except for Zai, do flap in some way. Once you're on any kind of task, mental or physical, Zai will just keep zoning on perfection, and then spirit forms will come from that perfection overlapping, and anything else will be taking off of it. It's like a picture of perfection developing or coalescing, and then someone trying to disrupt the process because in Department 4 someone forgot their pencil. Now I'm making an exaggeration, but Zai does kind of have the attitude of sort of like, I'm doing a very important process here and it's delicately balanced. It's a delicately balanced process that I'm doing here, and unless you can help with this process, then really I don't want to talk to you. I don't know what you have to say, because it's just going to spill the water in the bowl, and my job is to not let that happen as the Zai. Do you want to add anything over?
Yeah, it ties actually back into clarity and precision, because if you're not, if you don't have dispassion, then you automatically lose clarity. You can't have a clear lens if you're being moved by all of these energies.
Yeah, shakes it, makes it ripply and cloudy, exactly.
Right, and with precision, it's very surgical. It's like the bowl of punch metaphor. If you flap in a way you shouldn't, you might spill that punch. So you have to not allow it to flap you. Yeah. So that's good. Diagnostics.
Okay, diagnostics. The thing here is, it is what it is. And this way, Zai and Nai have some corollary in that they tend to make other powers flinch a bit. And they come from 2 different ways, but it's similar. With Nai, there's a scope of something, and there is I think the answer might be outside the scope. People tend to be like, ow. For some reason, they want the scope to actually have it. Zai works in a different one. It's within the scope, but what's within the scope, there are tender areas. Zai doesn't see that way. It just looks within the scope and it's looking for perfection, clarity, perfection, precision. And so now when it's looking, it's trying to figure out what is perhaps causing it to shake. What's causing it to shake? It could be me. It could be the environment. It could be someone around me. There's all kinds of reasons that could happen. So I have to eliminate them. Now, you see I just said that. There's an unflappability to that is an accepted part of the Zai process. That as you look within the scope of things, there are some things that some people may consider to be off limits. Not if they're fucking up perfection. Excuse me, not to Zai. If you're messing with perfection, then I don't care what you have to go. If the goal is perfection and something's causing imperfection, then you have to go. It has to go. Whatever it is has to go. And that's rather unflappable as you're going through, I like an analogy, like a surgeon. And now you're looking for what you're going to cut out that is a problem, what you're going to remove. Now you don't want to remove any more than you have to, so it's not emotional. Thus you're unflappable. You're also going to cut out whatever needs to be cut out, like it's cancer. Unemotional in that as well. So that will also kind of have an unflappability to it. There's all kinds of ways diagnostics can come out. Maybe he wants to throw it in there, but at any point, it'll always have that kind of surgical quality, and that you are just, it has to be done. You know what I mean? Even if you don't move yet, it's simply the recognition that a problem is what a problem is. This is where you see dispassion really on display, as opposed to the Zhi caring. Even if the problem is actually something that one of your other powers, one of your other social alchemies actually cares about. But if you're actually trying to figure out how to do the perfect dance recital, or compose the perfect song, or put on the perfect party, anything, perfection is a spirit form. It has a way. And so if you overlap perfection on a motif and it shows distortion, the distortion is what the distortion is. It does not matter what the answer is. It could be a friend. It could be something that's been around for 1,000 years. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. But if you try to put perfection over and there's distortion, you go and tickle it, diagnostics, it does not matter what that answer is. Perfection has said what that answer is, and we don't get a say. Mm-hmm. And so there's an unflappable ability of like, I'm not saying this. Perfection's, this isn't even my opinion. This is a perfection's opinion. So,
yeah. Right. It does have a very objective feel in that context, since you're completely uninvested from the matter. Where, yes, you're my best friend, but there's a problem that you're having doing this. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, that covers it pretty well.
Yeah, pretty good. But diagnostics can strike a lot of people as unflappable, only because the other powers don't work like that. And all the powers, when they have another power that does not work like them, there is an interpretation of that. So Nai is interpreted as frustrated, Zai is poignant. Zai, because of these ways, the other powers, they can't do that. They can't stand on 49.5 and be like, oh, what a beautiful day. You know what I mean? They can't. And so for that reason, it seems unflappable, because that would flap them. So, go Zai.
Okay, so that brings us to principal understanding.
That is kind of the concept of what works. Mm. And where you can see flapping in that is if there's an activity, something happens, a scenario, a situation, and similar like abstractions, principal understanding is kind of like that, and they can kind of pull spirit forms out. But it tends to be more related specifically to the workings of a motif. That's what pulls out. What's making a motif go? What are the tumblers of it? So for that reason, once you pull it out, you may see another situation where spirit form tumblers of that same logic are in play. So you can just put it in. That's understanding. That can freak a lot of people out. It can freak them out that A, you pulled a principal understanding from potentially someone that's very weird, or seems weak, or has a bad reputation, or is whatever. But a principle is a principle, people. That's Zai's opinion. He's very flappable about that. I don't care where that principle is embedded. A good working principle is a good working principle. I can use it for whatever I want to use it for. Doesn't mean once you pull principle out, there's no association with the way it's been used by anyone or anything else. It's just a principle, and now it's mine. Yeah. And then there's unflappable in the way going back, which is not only did I pull it out from anything that you want, I could put it into anything I want. Like MMORPG. You're going to put an online video game structure into a spiritual model? Why not? It's a good principle. Mm-hmm. And right there, that's unflappable. Yeah. That's flapping most people. That doesn't flap me. That seems like a good principle.
It's kind of like the logical fallacy playing the Hitler card.
Yes.
You support that? That's what Hitler did.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of worked though.
Yeah, so you shouldn't do it like he did, and you should do a bunch of other things, but that's mixing things. That's mixing in other powers, other perceptions, other dynamics, other than, for example, Hitler was an asshole and evil, but he was a good public speaker. It had a movie coming out with Colin Firth and Geoffrey Rush about the British king who needs to give a speech, and he's very nervous about giving speeches. I want to see this movie. It's a true story. And he basically needs to give a compelling speech to the people to rally them. And he's kind of watching one of the scenes, Hitler on screen, and he's talking German. I think his son asked him or something, what's he saying? And he says, I don't know, but I think he's saying it rather well. That's principal understanding. Mm-hmm. It's separate from the fact that this is my enemy, he's evil, I mean, he's everything I'm against, but he's doing that maneuver with a principle that's working. Why is that working? And so to think like that, most people kind of shudder. Mm-hmm. Shuddering is another way of, shuddering and flinching are other ways of saying flapping. Mm. And so most people shudder at that thought. Because you just cut it out and take it out, then it's not related anymore, so there's no reason to shudder. That doesn't get on the principle, right? The users of a principle are not the principle. So once it's pulled out, if there's any uckiness to it, that's not on this anymore. I have the pure principle. Vice versa, it goes in reverse on that same kind of thing. Is when you put it back in, like the MMORPG, one is that you would pull it out. That you would at all pull out what you consider to be some sort of philosophical truth from an MMORPG. Okay, that seems ridiculous on the coming out part, kind of the other thing. You pulled it out from that. Then there's the putting it back in. Like, I'm going to use it to set up my mandala. You're going to put that into the highest level of spirituality? Be like a Hitler thing, like, you're actually going to teach some principle to, like, kids going into some sort of, like, public speaking. You're like, well, just because some asshole did that doesn't mean it's not good to teach people going to public speaking.
Yeah.
But a lot of people might freak out that you pulled it out from certain areas, and that from there you take those principles and infuse them into somewhere else. That's like, egads. But it's very effective because a tool's a tool. A tool's a tool. It is separate from how it's ever been applied, the history of it, or any of the nearly infinite possibilities that the principle could be used for. So all that has been used or could be used is irrelevant to the principle itself and your intention for it. Those are two different, they're different, and thus they're immune to other considerations, which makes you unflappable, because other people would be worried about those things, but they're not there. Not from Zai's point of view. Once a principle has been understood, then it's like the internet. That's public knowledge. It doesn't have, you know what I mean? That doesn't belong to anyone. It doesn't have any stain, good or bad. It's irrelevant. It doesn't belong to anyone. And so a lot of those kind of flappings, those shudderings, are because they believe certain principles belong to a certain system or people or something else, but it doesn't.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to situational logic and analysis.
Thing to focus on here is kind of the idea of, like, that was yesterday, this is now, and that is tomorrow, and this is now. Because Zai is very much in the moment as a right brain power. And so I think you may use an analogy for this for the composing. I'll use one, a physical one. I have the Zai with the V. Back a few years ago, I used to like to grapple and such, and when you're kind of playing around with friends and you're out there sparring, rolling around, you have techniques. And so these techniques may actually have worked before, but now you're experiencing a situation that is applying it in a way you've never used before. First of all, it freaks a lot of people out, but Zai is freeform. It doesn't mind that. In fact, that's fun. It's kind of fun to take a technique or a way of doing things and then keep finding the perfection of it in a nearly infinite variety of scenarios, of stressors, of impacts. That's fun. So for myself, if I'm in a situation, we've been here sometimes, we're teaching someone, and I'll tell them when they're in a match to move their hand a certain way. And they sometimes, if they don't have their Zai well developed, they might shake that off. And I've asked students afterwards, like, why'd you shake that off? And they're like, that isn't how that move is done. And I'd say, yeah, but, and I couldn't say all this is too tacit because of the time they were there in the match. I'm like, yeah, but Dominic's head or Chaz's leg or whatever, it was doing something that was unusual. They were doing something unusual, and so I said move your hand to a different position because in that situation, that was perfect. They did something weird. It threw perfection off. The perfection of that move was not like it normally is because they did some sort of unusual counter, some unusual defense. So that's not flapping. Oh, they moved over here. That means in this situation, this is perfect. A lot of people have a hard time changing perfect. Like, I have the perfect way. But today things have changed, but I have the perfect way. That's flapping. They're flapping at the old perfect way.
Yeah.
It's not relevant right now. It's only relevant about this perfect way, this singular event perfect way. Conversely, I can be in a match where I've seen, for example, against students in matches where they're going for a move, and the reason that they did that was it's something that could be there, but it's not yet. They have jumped the gun. Again, this brings in the unflappability. Is Zai knows when things have become a little weird from perfection, and so it adjusts a new alternative perfection for that moment. It also notices when the time is not quite right. There's a tendency, and you'll see it, for example, when fighters telegraph. Actually, Zai helps a lot in not telegraphing, in anticipating the moment. A lot of times, you go to do a move, if you over-anticipate, it won't work because it was just a little too soon, and because a little too soon, you told the person what you're going to do. And now they move to block it. They wouldn't have thought to move to block it if you'd waited a little longer. In that situation, you sometimes may hold a move shorter or longer because the moment is right for that. There's a truth to it. There's a perfection to any given moment. And I'll hand over to him and more like using the knee. But anything you're doing, there's kind of like a truth to it, a perfection of it. And so you're trying to find that, and it doesn't matter where it goes. So similar, like I mentioned how Xi and also later on Z, they track things. I Spy Dry, and they're tracking sequences unfolding. It's an objective discernment tracking. But Zai and Zhai are a subjective discernment. They actually kind of are finding their own inner way as things are moving. So it's tracking an inner phenomenon. So if I'm, for example, grappling or students grappling, the situation as it changes, Zai can track it. It can track that things are not as they were just a second ago. It's very freeform and fast, like Zhai and Ni and V are very fast. I think I kind of said enough on that, but I'm sure there's use of that with Ni, as far as that kind of thing?
Yeah. Would you like me to comment on that?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess I could use another example in composing music. How at one point in the song, a melody or a rhythm line or something that worked really well, that situation will change as soon as something else is introduced. As soon as you introduce something, the levels got to go down. Maybe that needs to be removed entirely, just because as soon as you introduce this outside part of the song, then the game is changed essentially, and you have to customize what you had for that situation. Situational logic is very much about customization, because the situation is constantly changing, which means the criteria for what works and doesn't work is also constantly changing. So
and fast.
Yeah. So they need to be customized to work.
Definitely. And also add just one more tidbit on there is that for where we at here? The situation. Yeah. That there is a tendency for powers that are not Zai to say, I guess, this phrase in some way. What about? And see, I think they're shifting very fast. The criteria has turned. Zai wastes no time. The criteria turns, it adjusts automatically its equilibrium, its concept perfection, yada yada. All the other powers in some degree will go, wait, but what about? They're flapping. The beat changed in the match, the beat changed in the song, and so you change. And for where Zai's like, if I have to explain why that shift is too slow.
Yeah. So
Zai just does. And other people are like, but what about? I'll get back to you once I've navigated this. And so Zai is very good. Like, it knows the course is changing, and it just makes all the adjustments very tacit this way as it goes along. And it doesn't feel the need to question itself.
Yeah.
It knows it changed, and so there's not that, but what about that's different than last time? It doesn't even think like that because it felt the change. It literally felt the change, and that's why it's moving, so there's no doubt.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like you're sweating the small stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that brings us to refining.
We're now going to get to the processing of it. So the other one was sort of like a way of being, and then also kind of like how they detected stuff. But we're now going to get to the processing. So with refining and also optimizing. Refining with taking away weakness, and refining with putting in strength. There's a sort of concept here of it takes what it takes. So for example, let's say you have 49-51, and in order to win, you need to bring the line down to 52, or you need to bring the line up to 48. That's the line. You can't do it, you can't do it, you don't get the win. It's very matter of fact about that. So, for example, in the diagnostic, okay, there's an issue in here. Refining says, okay, in order to get that imperfection out, the most efficient route would be to use a certain kind of surgical instrument and to go this route through the organs to get to that and the extraction back out. That's what's going to do. It's going to refine the most efficient route to go in and not disturb. Remember we talked about the thing before about the power flows of not disturbing? That's why it doesn't flap. It's trying to not bother the system any more than it has to, but it has to do that. So it's very unflappable both ways. It's unflappable about puncturing and going in to whatever it has to do in order to refine out whatever the diagnostic says is the problem. And then they're also unflappable in that they are trying to not make it any more of a spectacle than it needs to be. It is the most efficient route to get the problem out with the diagnostic and get it out. So there's a steadiness to it, a very steady quality, and also it goes back to situational logic in some ways, because the logic is now said what the logic of a plan is. Refining a lot of times involves steps that if you don't do them, you will not get the refined product, and they're not optional. So there's no point flapping about it. Why flap that? The only choice really is you feel like doing it or not. Flapping, it does mean thing, because if you need to raise the line up to 48 or more, or bring the line down to 52 or lower, if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. If you can't do it, walk away. And if you're gonna do it, then walk it out until it gets there, and don't whine. Don't whine about it, because the line is not doing this to be personally a problem for you. A line is just what it is. And so there's a perfect way to address it, and there's a question of whether or not you have those resources, if you actually have what it takes, or you feel like doing it. But flapping, if you choose not to do it or to do it, either way is useless, as far as Zai is concerned. If you decide, I don't have what it takes, or don't feel like doing what it takes to bring the line up close to that 49.51, which often happens when it comes to winning, especially when it comes to what it takes. When it comes to refining, you often do some quick edits. When you do that, it chops it down and makes it more perfect, but it could be more perfect still. And as you do that, you have to call off things, cut off things, shave off things that could be more tender, more having some meaning to you. But the ability to do that is why you'll defeat, for example, other Zai. If you're going on a mission and the person with the lightest pack wins, going on a hiking thing and the person with the lightest pack wins, here's a Zai. What can I do without? That's refining. What can I do without? And the person who can do that better, they'll win, because they'll make the absolute minimum choices to get the pack to where they can survive the hiking trip, but with absolutely nothing extra. They've refined that pack. They've also optimized it. Does that make sense? They've actually done everything they can to push the limits. And we'll get more into limit pushing in a second here, but Zai is very comfortable with limit pushing in itself as a system. Z is a system out here, but Zai understands the system of the self and how hard you can push it. And the fact that you can push yourself harder at taking away weaknesses that may be painful, or pushing in strength, doing more push-ups, doing more work on a song, taking more calibrations, more customizations. It's work. But if you can push the system more, you get a better product. And then you win. And so the person who flaps about it, well, you're flapping and not making your product better, aren't you? If you don't flap, then you're on your eyes on the prize, which is making the product better, regardless of how that feels. So that gets in later on some other things like hardcore or whatever, but already seeing that pushing the limits and the comfortability that that's actually needed. That's Zai's heroic job.
Yeah.
Brinksmanship. It's very good at that kind of thing of actually pushing the line and being the last person to call off. Because if you chase a song that way, if I chase a physical maneuver that way, we'll take it further. We'll take it as far as you can before you break. Remember, Zai and Zai, they're about not breaking. So this is about taking something as close to the 49.51 and not breaking. Or even maybe just flips and knowing when it'll flip. And if you want that to happen, and what it would take to do it. Or what it would take to hold off that happening.
Yeah. A little anecdote that I had that I was talking about them before the video was when I was performing this electronic music piece that I did, and halfway through it, I just lost sound. So, being a G user in the far end of my psyche, I can actually hear it freaking out back there, like, oh no, you're losing the crowd, you're losing the crowd. But my source, Zai, is actually saying, do not listen to any of that, do not make any more moves that you should fix the problem and get out of there now.
Exactly, and that's very useful. That's very unflappable, and it's going to take it to an efficient resolution of the stress. So it does actually handle the stress, but it handles it by not flapping and then going to a precise route that will get the remedy.
Yeah. All right, so optimizing.
I already touched on it a little bit, but I'll just do it again, is that when you optimize, if you optimize an athlete, I use the Zai V, and if you want to jump in with knee, you can. You are going to push it to its limits. In fact, two athletes that are going for an event, the one who pushed themselves to the limit less in the gym, this is well known, is probably going to lose. So it's a classic example of Zai, is knowing what your body could do, what your mind can do, what your heart can do, what's actually with Ji, it does pair with Ji, and actually pushing to the brink. And brinksmanship has a lot to do with winning high intensity engagements of all sorts. So it's a very important power that way.
Okay, so moving right along to calibration.
Okay, with calibration, when Zai adjusts, now Zai also does this. It has the same kind of tracking in and tracking out with greater or lesser gradations of like these dials that kind of like can discern. But because of the way Zai is logic based, it really has a very much dial tuning effect. And for this reason, you'll see a lot with Zai with V and also Zai with Ni when it is chasing something. It's going to, oh yeah, super broad and super fine is, for example, when you look at, I think a really good analogy here is you're on a screen in a computer, and for example, we work on some editing stuff sometimes, and when you look at the screen, you can move the bar around, and when you do, it makes the screen move. But depending on how zoomed in to the time of the video you're doing, it can make it seem like when you move the mouse a lot that the jogger hardly moves at all, or that you move the jogger bar a very little and it jumps all over the screen. So it's very jarring. In this case, the cursor in this analogy is flapping. So one thing that takes it off, and I've seen Jonathan, he's very good at this when he's working the program, he's much better than I am, is he's very good at zooming in and out to a proper truncation of the material so that when moving in and out of that dial, it's appropriate to span that length well. If the length changes, Zai's very good at pulling out, so the next dial also smoothly goes through that spectrum. When you don't have that, there's often the feeling of, it doesn't move because it's not been calibrated correctly, and so you move a lot of force and very little happens. Or it hasn't been done correctly to where very little touching and way too much force happens. So one thing that gives Zai also unflappability is the ability to calibrate their touch. As they're doing equilibrium, they can be like, equilibrium for a storm. We're not in storm anymore. Equilibrium for a smooth, casual lounge ride. It sounds funny, but imagine a ship that can calibrate for an optimum ride, but it could do that if it was in a storm and if it was actually in calm. You'll just keep making that more perfect, but it can shift into very different gears. That ability can be under great stress and find perfection in that. It can also be like totally calm and trying to find the shade of super ultra calm. Those are both dials of perfection. One's under like the stress of intense impact. The other is the stress of not being able to see it. So what it can do, it can like zoom in, and then you have a magnifying glass on, and then it doesn't strain your eye. Because eye straining in any kind of pod power context is a kind of flapping, huh? Zai doesn't do that. Once you realize, why is that uncomfortable? Oh, we need to go to click vision. It can kind of like click what vision or what dial of refinement it wants to use, so that's an appropriate sizing. It kind of makes, it takes away the jarringness of bringing appropriate resources. About Zai, you see a lot often with architects, interior design. It's very good at actually knowing what is an appropriate amount of something for the thing they're working on. Because that could make you flap, couldn't it? You come into a room and you sort of plan it, but maybe your Zai's not so good. And when you do that and you come back, you bring things to fill it up, but they're far too little. You didn't Zai correctly, actually that won't fill it up. Or you bring way too much. I'm not going to fit in nearly as many things in this design scheme as I thought. Zai's very good actually, I'm going to design some such where I'm going to try to find equilibrium in this room, in this situation, and figuring out an approximation, even before it starts dialing, an approximation of what kind of dialing would be required. So the first dialing is rather smooth. So it has a very, again, steady. Very steady in both when Zai's with V, very steady-handed, and Zai with Ni, it's very steady of thought. So, very cool.
Yeah, I was going to add, it's kind of I can see that you with Zai and V being used a lot, like in driving, where if you're spinning out or something, you need to compensate a perfect amount.
Yes.
If you don't, you'll overcompensate and continue to spin out.
Exactly.
Okay. So we're on to reactive theorizing / deductive reasoning.
Okay, this is the overall theme of the power flows for Zai, and what it's going to do is be a muscle that reacts to impingements coming in or information coming in. And if it gets information just randomly thrown at it, or even if its own knee or V has gone and gathered it, it's only concerned with things that are actually going to be relevant to the case of perfection that it's on. So there's a feeling of, I'm not going to move any more than I have to. Similar he mentioned there in the spinning out thing. If you're holding your hand steady in the wheel, it looks like you're not discerning like an objective discernment because you're not moving the wheel left or right. Zai's not moving. It's actually holding the wheel on the curve point to make the spin out, and then the car is shaking and everything, and you're not going to let it come off of where you're holding it. That's where it needs to be. So there's a feeling of, similar to Zai in a values-based way of, I'm not moving unless I'm supposed to move. Now, I'm not supposed to move, then I don't move. My job is to not move when I'm not supposed to move, and then if it's time to move, I bring up the big, heavy, sacred or vital gates and I let those resources go. And in Zai's case, it has very much like an Occam's razor feel, which is, and that's why it's deductive reasoning. When you're trying to solve something, you don't add clutter to a problem just to make a problem more cluttered. I mean, that's just stupid. So when you come into a problem or situation, it doesn't have to be a problem, it can just be an issue. You take what the issue presents and you start actually sectioning things off and understanding what makes everything work, all the principles of it. There's a feeling of, if you add things from other powers to the equation, you actually just change the situation again. And so where Occam's razor, for example, comes on is if you're trying to solve a scientific problem, the problem is a problem on its own. If you add in just random stuff, not only do you mess things up, you've literally, situational logic, you've invented a new problem. You actually took the one we're working on and made it into some sort of platypus problem. And so Zai doesn't want that. It's like, well, we already have an issue, let's solve that issue. And what comes from there will help illuminate the next problem that needs to be solved. So you kind of like unlock one tumbler, and then you unlock the next one, and the next one, and the next one. So it actually has a very good power at following flow, at figuring out why something's happening, and then what is the jam in the stream that's making it not happening. And actually, if you introduce too many things, first of all, you won't see the jam that is there, and you may introduce your own jam. And so that's when the Zai does not want to do. Its job is to unjam things, get them back to equilibrium. And so it's going to find, in all those things you talk about, the quickest, most efficient route to do anything. You got anything? Or?
That kind of covered it. There are some situations that I've seen pretty often, especially in scientific discussions, of mixing two theories where this theory seems to work too, and this is a different theory that has different looks. If you mix them, you'll be more accurate, right? No, actually it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Because then you have to zoom in to see if those theories are even looking at the same phenomenon, because if they're not, then you've just created an even bigger inaccurate problem.
Yeah. The reactive theorizing and deductive reasoning. Rule one of solving a problem: don't add to the problem.
Yeah.
If I had to sum it up, yeah. So Zai's like, don't contribute to that. Similar with Zai and Hope. If you want harmony, first thing you do is don't bring toxicity to the party. You know what I mean? So that's Zai's point of view. Is like, if you don't want to disrupt it, then don't add. Don't add any clutter.
Yeah. Okay, so now to the counterbalances.
Counterbalances?
Tactical / ruthless.
Okay, the counterbalances are sort of like shadings or flavors of the distinct signal, and have a lot to do with how people may interpret the distinct signal, and it can help you maybe find the distinct signal because some of these may hit you this way. So for the Zai, it has a tactical and ruthless, and this is because Zai says for the case of perfection what you could do. What is involved in the case, what principles could be applied, and which of those principles that could be applied you possess. So it's kind of like, here's a game going on, and here's what's in play, and here's the cards that I have, and it doesn't mean you're going to use them, that's important, but the fact that you can think like this, for example, if Zai is going to interact, we use G to highlight it, an interaction with friends, and there's an issue. it's going to look at the issue from a Zai point of view of what is possible here. Could I fire the person? This is my friend now. It doesn't mean you would. But Zai comes to the point of view of you can't accurately come at a problem unless you actually just look calmly and coolly, unflappably, at the potentialities. If you don't look at all potentialities truly, then your equations will be off. It doesn't mean you're going to do them just because you account for them. But Zai is going to account for the possible things that you could pull off. And so that's tactical, but also some people would see it as ruthless, the fact that you can think in those terms, that Zai does think in those terms. For example, even with like, say a project you're working on. I could scrap it. People are like, but you put so much into it. I didn't say I was gonna scrap it.
Yeah.
I said I could scrap it. Zai thinks like that. It's weighing what is possible, and in order to weigh correctly, it literally has to give what the weight of everything is inside of it. It's kind of like Zai does an internal weighing, and so it has to know the internal weight of things, and then what's over what, and what could do what. It's not in any way putting an opinion out to actually give something weight. But a lot of the powers, and therefore modes and situations, will feel that way, that the simple rating in a cold way of anything is a kind of ruthless position. But it's not. In fact, it often is the most helpful. For example, I think to help this person's leg, I have to re-break it. Is that ruthless or tactical? You could even look at it as very altruistic, but it's really all the same thing, which is the perfection of the moment is, I think this person's leg, in order to be more perfect, actually has to be hurt. It needs to be hurt for a few weeks and be rebroken, or it can be its more perfect form at the end. So you can see how it can be interpreted in that way as very noble, tactical. But in other situations, that same kind of thinking could be interpreted as very ruthless. So it's a question of the people and how they're interpreting it, and how that power is being used by the individual. Because Zai, as a hero, is going to use the most heroic options, but it is going to be aware of all of them as possible, and what can be done. Next is hardcore dismissive. How much time are we going to pass here? Probably.
Got about 10 minutes.
Oh, we're fine. Okay. We mentioned before about the 4951, and an overall theme in that is when it comes to pushing an idea, or even a physical motion, or anything, or even an emotional interaction, there's like stress limits. Because Zai focuses on what is the 4951 and what side do I want to be on, and how close can I get to it before I break, and how close can we get to it before someone else breaks. That's what it thinks about. That most people that's kind of hardcore, man. But that's Zai's consideration. It's very concerned about breaking points. Both Zai and Zai are, but Zai in a very more logical way that people kind of associate with that, in pushing something to the limits. You want to add anything to that?
No, that's good.
Okay. I'll just add one thing quick on that, is the dismissive side of that continuum. Is because of that comfortability Zai has, other people may feel that objections or other perceptions that change things are being just dismissed. But from Zai's point of view, if it's very comfortable with 4951, then really, until we get below like 52 or above 48, it's not even something worthy of discussion. That's important, and that comes off as dismissive sometimes, because that is how Zai thinks. It's sort of like, whoa. No, you didn't even look. It's not over 48. Now a lot of people are like, that can seem dismissive if that is not a well thought out or well discerned Zai position.
Yeah.
But if it is, then it's fine. It's correct to do, and you're just hardcore. If you're right, then you're hardcore. If you're wrong, you're dismissive because you should have listened to it and you did. So again, it's a question of how developed the power is.
Yeah. A lot of times the dismissiveness, it's kind of a response to extreme pressures that you might be getting from outside influences. And especially if people are trying to flap you in certain ways, then you just have to start pairing them just by irrelevant. Yeah.
Yeah, Zai shields up.
Yeah.
Actually, on that, kind of an analogy for that we were talking earlier, as well as for like the old thing where you got like the people with the guns, the musket guns, and they only have a few shots and it takes a long time to reload. So it's very important in that kind of style that the first volley does a lot of damage. You can't just keep sending more over because it's slow. So that's where the old thing of like steady, not until you see the whites of their eyes. And As you get close to seeing the whites of their eyes, it starts getting a little gnarly. And the people might start looking over the commander like, they're really close. Do you see the whites of their eyes? Then we still don't fire yet.
Yeah.
And so that is unflappable, but could also be seen as rather dismissive. But they're very close to hurting us. But Zai's like, but they're not there yet. So it's dismissive of concern, worry, flinching, flapping if it has not yet crossed the line. It hasn't crossed the line yet, then we don't move.
Yeah. That's when the one guy panics and shoots. And
Yeah,
screws up
goodness.
The whole thing. Okay, so self-assured / condescending.
Because of that ability, it could seem very active because of how strongly we're putting it out here, but actually it's a more defensive, reactive ability. And so it's going to move extremely powerfully, like Zai does, to handle the situation and then reestablish that equilibrium state. So it doesn't want to move more than it has to, but when it does, it's going to move with that precision and clarity, perfection, and so on. But people will question that because the precision they may not have, the clarity they might have, so they're going to question the fact that you're seeming okay. So they'll want to know, why are you okay? Are you okay? Checking on Zai. We good? Yeah, we're good. And when you do like a Zai check, for those who have the Zai in their, especially the conscious hierarchy, and especially on their near side, it assures them that nothing has changed, that the bowl of water is still completely unrippled. There can be a lot of things happening around a bowl, but if it doesn't make the bowl ripple, then as far as Zai is concerned, we're good, and there's no reason to change position. In fact, if there's a lot happening around a bowl of water, but it's not making the bowl of water tip over, a lot of times in the heat of a moment, Zai's position is to try and move the bowl of water now would be the worst thing to do. In fact, right now the bowl is not being hit. So a lot of people kind of freak out those moments, but freaking out actually increases the chance of it happening, of a bad outcome actually occurring. So Zai actually doesn't get tired of that, and that's important. We talked about the extreme energy that Zai can take, and it's like, we're good, we're okay, we can make this. It also has a, for lack of a better thing, it knows that it can pull it off, and that to give too much attention to other people is a mistake. And so it can handle not just extreme, like as far as one dose of flapping, it can handle repetitive, continuous flapping and nothing will happen. And that's important to note, because some people can handle flapping one time. But what if someone flaps 20 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times? Zai will just keep going back. It's the same flap as before, and the computer programming says you get the same response as the other 10,000. This is just 10,001.
Yeah.
It doesn't get rattled just because people go, ah! Okay, go down to aisle 4. Next word comes, ah! Go down to aisle 4. Just because 10,000 people, now eventually maybe Geo turn on and say there's a lot of people freaking out, but Zai's point of view is nothing has changed. It's just a lot of people or systems or perceptions are having freak out reactions. Intensity of freak out by other people or other systems, and lots of freaking out. A large volume does not change perfection. That's like 2 + 2 = 4, and like a person goes, but I always thought it was 5. Well, what's 2 + 2 = 4? Another person comes in, I thought it was 7. It's not. 2 + 2 = 4. And maybe there's a whole freaking tribe of people that don't know 2 + 2 = 4. It doesn't, that changes nothing. It changes absolutely nothing. And so that's the upside. That's the self-assured. You walk into a village, and the entire village does not know 2 + 2 = 4. Some people will break earlier on kind of like group brainwashing, like G brainwashing, until eventually they just say 2 + 2 = 5 just because maybe it is because so many people say so. Zai won't feel that way. 2 + 2 = 4. Mm-hmm. My Zai says 2 + 2 = 4. The bowl of water, when I say 2 + 2 = 4, the water stays still. When you say 2 + 2 = 7, the water says, fuck them. I'm gonna make this up. But the water's like, no, that's ridiculous. And it doesn't matter if they say 5 or 7 or 1,000 of them do. They say that, and it's like, what if we do 7? If we do 7, we'll be wrong. We're stupid like that. That's what Zai does. Zai comes point of view, and it does not matter the intensity or the amount, the volume, unless an actual criteria of perfection has been shifted. Until then, we don't move.
Yeah.
And thus we're unflappable. Well, I'm not. I try to be. I have my unflappable movements, but this is a true unflappable hero right here. So rock on. I think we got it. So bye everyone.